Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Vigilante. I am here with Patreon supporter Lucas Pompey. Lucas, thank you so much for being on the show. We just did another very interesting video about ways that Lucas has gotten involved and sort of the neoliberal bubble that he got to see in all of its full buying the Russia narrative glory. But on this video, I want to talk to you about you said you've done some research and work into permaculture, and so why don't you talk to us a little bit about your experience with that and how it works for anyone who's doesn't understand it or.
Alrighty. Oh boy, permaculture has many definitions. I'm not sure how which my favorite is. Basically, permaculture is a mix of three words: permanent, agriculture, and culture. So like permanent culture, permanent agriculture, and it's the idea of making a sustainable agricultural system and a sustainable culture that could sustain humans and all other forms of life indefinitely on this planet, in peace and happiness, and kind of like the idealism, your own personal utopia, like not utopia for everybody, but like a personal version of it, and so that would involve, solar projects and wind projects, and then, having sustainable farms like food forests and agroforestry and mob stock grazing and silvopasture. Like there's many different models out there that you can look to that all work amazingly. Joel Salatin's farm is one of my favorites. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
But he's got a farm where he has cows and he moves them every single day, like how buffalo or the bison would move naturally, like as herbivores in a system. And it really, when you look at herbivores and especially like the ones that would graze and move on, like buffalo or bison, that's what where I disagree with a lot of vegans is like a lot of people watch Cowspiracy once and they're like, oh my gosh, cows are evil. There's no way to sustainably raise meat, and everyone who eats meat is like awful. And then if you really spend your entire, if you spend like a lot of time getting into diet and farming and food and the tradition of farming, the tradition of food throughout Europe and other cultures, herbivores, especially those that graze and move on, are very important culturally. Like in the United States, just on the East Coast alone, there used to be herds of 7 to 8 million bison going from Florida to Maine every year, up to Canada, going back and forth as the seasons got warm and cold. And in the middle of the country, in the Great Plains, there used to be herds of 70 to 80 million bison going up and down the country from Canada to Mexico and back every year. And whenever the European settlers came, they had to kill them because they fed the Native Americans. If without the buffalo and the bison, they knew the Native Americans would have to leave. And so as we expanded westward, we killed all the bison and drove them off. And then whenever we built the railroads, the bison would cause derailment. So they had bounties on the bison. If you bring us so many bison pelts and bison heads, then we'll give you this much land and this much money. And so, herbivores have a role to play in the natural system and in sequestering carbon. And so Joel Salatin, what he's done is by letting the grass grow up to its maximum point before bringing the cows in to eat it, he maximizes the amount of carbon sequestration, because whenever the grass gets old and it's about to die, he comes in and has the cows eat it all down to the ground, and that rejuvenates the grass and makes it young again and takes it back to its baby stage. And then all of that grass that they just ate now gets, digested and turned into carbon, which is then pooped out, stomped into the ground by their hosts. They move on to the next patch to do it again. And they sequester hundreds of tons of carbon dioxide every year. And then to keep the system natural, he brings in chickens after the cows. And so the chickens go through all the manure, they eat all the parasites, all the maggots, all the worms, all that stuff, and they keep the bugs down to a minimum on the farm. And they keep the cows healthy. So he has no pest problems, no parasite problems in his cows, doesn't have to feed them antibiotics, nothing. And the chickens get, protein, they get the grass, they get everything they need. And then he also gets, a bunch of free eggs out of that. And he's same thing with his pigs. His pigs are free range in a forest. That way they have shade, they have mud to wallow in, they have whatever they need, and they can eat whatever they want. And he's got one of the most profitable farms in the country. And as someone who got into nutrition and farming at a young age, something that's very important for a farm to be sustainable is that it has to be profitable. Because all of those unsustainable farms in the country are losing money on a daily basis, except for the ones that are massive and getting subsidies. The average corn farm in America lost $1,000 last year, and the suicide rate for farmers in the United States is double that of veterans. Because yes, and the average age of a farmer is over 60 years old in the United States. Farming is an industry that is in desperate times right now. There are way more, there's a lot of young people, like millennials and people who are younger, going into farming and wanting to get into sustainable farming. But the problems that they're running into is access to land, access to the resources once you have the land. Mainly it's just access to land. But then we also have the older farmers are running into what are they going to do with their farms? Like, can they retire? Most of them don't have the money to retire. If you're growing corn, wheat, or soy, the government, or not the government, but like the private corporations tell you what price they're going to buy it at. Because if they don't buy it from you, they can just go to the next person who's growing 1,000 acres of corn. And so you don't make any money selling the corn. And most of the farmers would have gone out of business decades ago if it wasn't for government subsidies that subsidized the growing of corn, wheat, and soy. And it's because of those subsidies that factory farming meat is actually cheaper than that from Joel Salatin's farm.
Wow.
Because if they had to pay the full price for all that chemically grown, fossil fuel corn that's grown using ginormous machines on thousands of acres, that would be way more than the cost of a cow that got to go out and eat some pasture for free.
So what about some research that has come out over the years about the methane gas from dairy farms is a depleter of the ozone layer?
Yes, that's true. The number one or number two cause of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet is agriculture, industrial agriculture. But whenever we talk about industrial agriculture, we need to make sure that we talk about industrial agriculture and not animal raising. Because if we say that livestock production is causing greenhouse gas, emissions to go up, that in itself is not entirely true. Because like I said, on Joel Salatin's farm, he actually is sequestering more carbon than they're putting into the atmosphere. And he's actually building soil. Whenever he started, there was no soil on his entire piece of land. And now he's got like 8 inches of soil built from all of the cows and everything. And the biodiversity of insects and plants and stuff on his land is so much higher than that on any other farm and that's growing, that has cattle grazing or doing whatever. And the reason is because he does that intensive mob stock grazing. And it's amazing because he's never planted a seed once. But if you go and you cut out 1 square foot of his pasture, you can count like 13 or 14 different species. Whereas if you go on a normal farm, you'll find 2 or 3.
So then go into a little detail for those of us watching this. What is then industrial farming? How is it different from what Joel is doing?
So industrial farming, I guess I would suggest, it's what we all envision as factory farming, and the massive scale production of cows, on feedlots, and putting them in pastures that are like too small for the amount of cattle and having to feed them extra. And whenever you have those giant runoff ponds full of antibiotics and waste, and it smells for miles and miles around, that is what I consider industrial farming. The stuff that is putting out all of the toxic fossil fuels, the stuff that really is abusing the animals. Like one of my other favorite farmers is Mark Shepard. He's got an orchard in Michigan or Wisconsin, maybe, and he's got pigs that go through his orchard during certain times of the year. And his motto is one bad day. He wants that final day whenever they're driven off in the truck to be the one bad day they have in their entire life. So all the way up until that day, they're going to be happy. And that's his motto. Whereas in the factory farming industry, it doesn't matter how many bad days they have as long as they get up to weight and time. If you watch, there's a chef in England named Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall. And a few years back, he did a series called Hugh's Chicken Run, where he went and he raised chickens the pasture way, and he had pasture raised chickens, and then he had factory farm chickens. And you can see in the show, he ends up having a mental nervous breakdown because of how inhumane the system is, because you have to go around, and if there's any chicken that's limping or has a deformity, you have to immediately take it outside, snap its neck, and throw it in the trash again, because that chicken is not profitable. and because it can get all the other chickens sick. And that's how it is in the United States, England, New Zealand, any country that has this industrial model of animal raising. Anytime there's an animal that's sick, they have to go in and they have to kill it right then and there. There's no veterinarians that visit. There's no, and the reason they give, like, one of the common things you'll hear on NPR with the nice polite Republicans is that they give animals antibiotics as a preventative to keep them from getting sick. But what they don't talk about is that that's not how it works, and that's not why they give it to them. The reason they give antibiotics to animals is because it stimulates growth. It's like a growth hormone, and it makes them fatter, it makes them put on weight. And if you have animals that are doing that, that is then fostering antibiotic resistance. Whereas on Joel Salatin's farm, there is no antibiotic resistance because none of those animals are ever exposed to antibiotics. And he actually, if you watch Food Inc., they show Joel Salatin and his butchering setup for his chickens. It is outside. He actually butchers his chickens in an outdoor kitchen where he gets everything ready and puts them in the packages to ship off to the customers. And the USDA and the FDA has tried to nail him a million times because they're saying, oh, man, you're outside, with all the bugs and everything. That's got to be so disgusting and so filthy and so many pathogens. But they've never been able to nail him because every time they do a test there, they find that the amount of pathogens and bacteria in his setup is thousands, if not millions of times less than it is in these giant factory slaughterhouses.
Wow. So how would people get access to his meat?
Well, I think that his meat's in fairly high demand because he's got a limited amount of farm and a limited amount of meat, and he's in Virginia, so most of his meat goes locally, I'm sure. And I know he sells jerky and things that he ships a little bit further, but he tries not to do that. But there's other farmers. Like if everyone in the United States were to go online and try to look up and find farmers near them, or even just go for a drive, you'll find small farmers near you that even if they're not the most sustainable, they are far more sustainable than any farmer that is growing and selling to Walmart or to Aldi or to any of these places. And even a lot of these places that'll say grass-fed and pasture-raised, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthy, because if they're pasture-raised cows, then that means that they're outside on a pasture. But that doesn't mean that they have enough space to adequately graze, adequately get enough grass. The best thing you can do is know your farmer. That is by far the best thing you can do. I would advocate for nothing less. And I always say to people whenever they want to stop supporting factory farming is that instead of giving up meat and butter and all these things you love entirely and trying to go cold turkey and then having a relapse and going back to it, try to eat less of it. And whenever you do, buy the higher quality expensive stuff. And when you buy that, the fact that it's expensive when you eat less.
So then, is there a website that could give people this information, or should they just do a web search for sustainable farming near me or something like that?
I would do web searches for farms near you, and maybe look in the yellow pages and things like that. Look in business catalogs and that kind of thing, or look in your tourism handbook. The agritourism is a very big business in the United States, especially here in Ohio with the Amish community. People like to go out and see the Amish orchards and that kind of thing, the Amish farms, and agritourism, especially with permaculture now and the sustainable agriculture, agritourism is becoming a very big business that is a very significant portion of the economy of the United States now, especially in certain states like California and Ohio and the New England states. But I don't know if there's any website out there that's cataloging all of the small-scale farms. But I do know that a certain website that I'm part of called WOOF.org, or the Woofing Network, Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. It's a network where if you want experience working on organic farms, you can go work on an organic farm, and they'll provide you with your food and shelter, and in exchange you work 9 to 5, or something similar to that.
Wow, well that's a fantastic opportunity.
And so you get the work experience, you get to see what it's like, you get to live on their farm, and there's a bunch of different kinds of setups. And the membership to view the farms and to participate in this and be verified is $40 a year. But to think of the opportunities you get, it's very much worth it. And if you do that, then you can see what farms near you may be on this list that you could go and you could work at for a day. And you can see maybe if you work for them for a week or two, then maybe they'll give you a ham hock or something. And in Ohio is not the most progressive place, so there's not very many woofing opportunities available. But I know in California there's hundreds, if not thousands.
Well, that's great. And I think that's a fantastic opportunity for people who might be watching this video and say, like, I didn't know this, or I only knew a little and I want to get more involved. It sounds like that's a fantastic opportunity to get involved and see for yourself. One of the things that's been great about doing this show is seeing people actually get involved. And I always say, get involved on a local level. And this is a fantastic way to do it. And I also talk about voting with your dollars. And as you say, buying local farms or sustainable farms and get away from the industrial farming. So I really appreciate you supporting the show and being a Patreon backer. And I appreciate all the information you've given us here with sustainable farming. Tell us the Wolf website again.
It's www.oof.org, I think, I believe it's woof.org, and it's the worldwide opportunities on organic farms. And there's Woof USA, Woof Australia, Woof Canada. So if you wanted to travel to other countries and do this, you can get a passport and a visa and use that opportunity to travel. And you can actually do woofing in Australia or in Canada or in Europe, and you can work on organic farms in other countries. And that's also a great opportunity that I plan on doing someday.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Well, Lucas, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing all this information with us. And we really appreciate you and all of the other political vigilantes out there helping to make Gotham great. Thanks for tuning in.